Now is the time for America to chart its course to a green energy future. And we can't do it without clean hydrogen. But it's up to regulators in Washington to establish the right rules that advance clean hydrogen today. Clean hydrogen needs the full extent of the production tax credit to decarbonize heavy industry, create high-skilled jobs, and lead the global energy transition. Get the facts at cleanhydrogentoday.org. Paid for by the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for June 25th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. On this episode, we will be talking about Wes Anderson, or was it? Maybe it was artificial intelligence. Who's to say?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I cannot wait for that episode or when we talk about Wes Anderson's Lord of the Rings and Wes Anderson's Harry Potter, Wes Anderson's Terminator, all of those good classics that he, of course, directed.
Exactly. And there's no
But
difference.
until then, we get original content from Wes Anderson before he plays the IP game.
Exactly. We sort of joked about that on episode 539 last week.
Yeah.
What Marvel movie is Wes Anderson going to direct? What is he jumping into
What did we say, Squirrel Girl or something like that? Was that the one that we thought was like that would actually probably happen?
Or the Rocket spinoff?
Yeah, I can kind of see that. I mean, I don't know. I would certainly never see him touch something like Kraven the Hunter, which is already coming out. No, that would be totally out of his wheelhouse.
Could you imagine a Kraven the Hunter Wes Anderson movie?
Where Kraven partners up with Mr. Fox himself, and they go on some type of expedition.
Yeah, a live action.
Now I just want to see that movie.
Yeah. A live action Fantastic Mr. Fox. If it was Disney, that's exactly where they would be headed, right? Where
oh my gosh,
we're going to.
If it gets people in the seats, of course they're going to make that happen.
Yeah. We talked about this on episode 539. It still continues to astound me that people do not see the difference between the artificial nonsense and true Wes Anderson. There is a vivid difference in my mind.
Oh, there's an absolute difference. Yeah. I mean, you notice that. I mean, Wes Anderson loves his symmetry, right? When we talk about the visual language of his movies, he likes symmetry. But that doesn't mean every shot needs to be symmetrical. Like you notice with he does play around with sense of place and positioning a lot more than I think those AI trailers are giving him credit for. Because you notice in those AI trailers, everything looks like it's a mirror that's splitting the image literally in half. It's got this perfect sense of symmetry to it, and that's just way too consistent for even Wes Anderson.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I didn't go to film school. There's certainly a lot of nerdy camera things that we could talk about that AI, at least at this point, they can't see into the nuance of that. It's all very superficial. And I guess it's hard to blame people because when they go to the movies, they simply want to be entertained. Maybe they want to be provoked a little bit. But it certainly says something about the cinematic language and the difference between, where an artist is coming from in that perspective and the audience who really doesn't know.
Exactly.
And so when they see the AI version of Wes Anderson, they can't distinguish that cinematic language at all.
I think it's so appropriate that we're talking about this topic leading into our thoughts on Asteroid City.
Yeah.
I feel like we'll get into this. I don't want to play our cards too early, but it almost seems like this movie came out too early because my thought would have been what Wes might be getting at here. It almost sounds like a response to those AI trailers.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah.
I'm actually very excited to get into Asteroid City. Of course, this is written and directed by the real Wes Anderson.
Not the bot version, not the chat GBT version.
Yeah, exactly. Should we just go through the entire cast here?
Do we have time?
I don't know. Well, let's just see how this goes because we have.
I mean, this cast is so big. The movie had to open with closing credits just to get through them all.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to name all of them, but this film does feature Jason Schwartzman, Scarlett Johansson, Tom Hanks, Jeffrey Wright, Tilda Swinton, Edward Norton, Bryan Cranston, Adrian Brody, Liev Schreiber, Maya Hawke, Steve Carell, Willem Dafoe. Who am I missing here?
Did you say Margot Robbie?
No, I did not get into Margot Robbie. And, and it's interesting.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, okay, so if you walk into this film and you don't know that she's going to be in the movie, and her scene, I don't know if it classifies as a spoiler, but it is near the end of the movie, and she shows up somewhat surprisingly. So it could have a spoiler-ish kind of feel to it, but since we let the cat out of the bag, she's in this movie. I guess we'll be
if you're paying attention to the closing credits at the opening of the movie, you're going to see her name.
Yes.
You're going to see Jeff Goldblum's name as well, which is a glorified cameo.
It is. That is a legit cameo for sure.
Yeah.
Margot Robbie at least has a genuine scene. Like there's
she has a crucial scene to the movie.
And so we'll certainly get into that. But yeah, and all of this, to your point, Brennan, is revealed in those opening / closing credits that we get at the at the beginning of the film. So
yeah,
I guess it's certainly fair to reveal that they're in the movie in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Following a writer on his world-famous fictional play about a grieving father who travels with his tech-obsessed family to a small rural asteroid city to compete in a junior stargazing event, only to have his worldview disrupted forever, is the synopsis of this film. Okay.
Yeah, that synopsis is interesting because I did not read that synopsis going into the movie. I've only seen the marketing, so there's a portion of that synopsis that took me off guard pretty instantaneously.
Same.
I'll say that.
Yeah, very very much so. This coming off the heels of the French Dispatch is compelling to me for reasons I'll get into. But first, Brendan, I'll toss it to you. What did you think about Asteroid City?
Yeah, because both of these films, The French Dispatch and Asteroid City, are about storytelling in a certain way within their own certain mediums. We'll certainly talk about that. But yeah, given that plot synopsis, the point that I wanted to highlight there is really those first couple words. Following a writer on his world-famous fictional play about a grieving father who travels and then so on and so forth. The trailers and the marketing are only showcasing the component of a grieving father who travels with his tech-obsessed family to Asteroid City. So what we're seeing is really this story, from the marketing at least, of the colorful aspects of this movie, when in actuality, this is a very meta movie. It's not really a play within a play. It's a play within the creation / production of a play.
Yeah.
And that's not a spoiler. That's what opens the movie. That sets the foundation. It's the literal framing device for the movie. Bryan Cranston comes out and introduces this aspect, and I was floored but confused but interested. I had no idea that this movie had a framing device
They
like
hit that
and
very well in the marketing.
They did, and I will admit it took a little while for me. When I say a little while, I mean maybe like the first third of the movie to kind of get the hang of what it was doing, because I couldn't really tell at first if it was the actual play but in production form or if it was like a behind-the-scenes kind of thing. It took me a while to realize this is a behind-the-scenes look at the creation of the play that we're eventually going to see, being Asteroid City. But weirdly, this framing device lends itself to a very different kind of Wes Anderson film that I think the marketing is also not suggesting. I tweeted that this is not a Wes Anderson movie. This is a sad Wes Anderson movie. And that is an endorsement, by the way. I really like this movie. I don't really know why yet. This is why I'm excited for this conversation. There's a lot that we can certainly decipher. It's a very existential Wes Anderson film. It's a much more melancholic Wes Anderson film. There's actually a lot less like if you're looking for that trademark Wes Anderson comedy, you're going to get it here, but in arguably smaller doses. There's a lot of quietness here in between character actions and dialogue. There's actually a lot less literal talking in this movie if you think about it, which I admit it took a little while to sort of get the hang of it, but when the story and its emotional core start to reveal itself, I was on board. This is perhaps the Wes Anderson film that's going to be the biggest I guess grower for a lot of people. And I say that with a lot of love. Like, I like that he's sort of challenging himself, and it, like I said earlier as we introduced this whole review, it seems as though he's making a movie that's kind of a direct response to not just those AI trailers, but similarly to what we talked about in episode 539 about the way people perceive the quote-unquote repetition of Wes Anderson and his visual language. The movie is kind of a deconstruction of his own visual language, and I found that really interesting. So we'll talk more about it, but yeah, I think at the very least right now this is maybe like middle tier Wes Anderson for me. Like maybe like of his 11 movies, I'd probably put this around 5 or 6, which is great to start off with. But this one could escalate. Like this one could get higher for me because there's a lot of hidden details here that I found really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know where this ranks for me within Wes Anderson. I haven't really quite done that exercise.
Might be
yet,
too early to say. Maybe I shouldn't have even bothered doing that exercise yet.
I will say this though. This is unequivocally one of my favorite films of 2023 so far.
Okay,
I
nice,
love
nice.
this movie. And it's funny. It's easy to look at this film on its face and talk about how quote-unquote Wes Anderson it is. And yes, the saturated color palette, its pastels, the composition of the film.
The use of miniatures, all that in here. It's yeah.
Even the framing of it, as surprising as it is, I do think is also very Wes. The camera movement, the editing, it all invokes the DNA of Wes. However, between this and The French Dispatch, we are in a distinctly more experimental era of Wes Anderson, and I am utterly here for it. Give me this all day. The spiritual existential examination of this film, coupled with its craft and technical prowess, makes it astoundingly sublime. In fact, I'd go as far as to say we haven't seen this kind of sorrow and melancholy since the Royal Tenenbaums in 2001.
I was gonna say, yeah, this definitely harkens back to the sadness of a movie like Tenenbaums. I certainly agree.
Absolutely, and I've always found Wes's movies to be thematically rich and his artful approach to be engrossing. But there's something about the merriment of those two things here, especially when combined with the film's somber tone, that I find so gracefully elegant. Now, that's not to say that this is anything better than anything Wes has done before. No. I honestly don't know at this point, as I mentioned earlier, but I do think Wes is evolving right before our eyes, and he's beginning to experiment and transform his usual aesthetics for something else beyond just craft for dollhouse sake. And as if that's not enough, there's an interesting irony here in the sense that Wes has always been defined by eccentricity, an attribute that's so recognizable that it's weirdly become maybe not mainstream, but people know his name and what he brings to cinema. And yet, for all of his idiosyncratic sensibilities, this is somehow even more bizarre than usual. And that makes this film all the more captivating to me. Like, I love how weird this movie gets.
It's like tone it back just a little bit, Wes, and all of a sudden it becomes weirder. It's like that's a concept that should not work. It should go the other direction. And I think it just mostly works in that way because in the overall trajectory of Wes Anderson's filmography, you expect some sense of escalation or consistency.
Yeah.
So the fact that he sort of reins some of those tones back a little bit, like I said, it's a more melancholic film. It's a little quieter. Yeah. There's less dialogue to kind of push the quirkiness forward. it seems weird and strange in the context of this still being a Wes Anderson movie because it feels like he's trying to do something new.
Well, and that's exactly it. I think what's so fascinating about some of the visual gags that we get in this film that are, shall we say, out of this world, there's a comedic touch to them given the context and how they come about. However, and as you just noted, because of the melancholy of this film, what those visual gags mean thematically, I think is really incredible. And it adds to the sorrow of this film in some ways, or at least the thematic undercurrent that Wes is messing around with here. So they have a lot of purpose. I would say most of what Wes does has incredible intentionality to it, if not everything.
Oh yeah, it's not random.
Does.
It's not. The only time I'd say his humor was maybe a little bit random was in something like Fantastic Mr. Fox, but that was kind of meant to be because it was meant to evoke a childlike imagination. Okay, so there is purpose to it. It's just a different kind of purpose. But here, every moment of visual humor, it eventually gets deconstructed in some type of way.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the framing and the tone of this film, because when Wes does delve into those weird territories, it like there's a contradiction there that shouldn't work, and in the hands of most filmmakers it probably wouldn't, but he is a master, and this is what AI Wes doesn't understand.
Can't do.
It doesn't understand those kind of nuances. But real Wes Anderson does, and he can make it work. So, we'll certainly dive more into this as we go. But between the film's weirdness, its thematic richness, its visual intuitiveness, not only is this one of the best movies of the year, but as I contemplate it further, I think this is going to rise the ranks for me in terms of even his own filmography. I really liked it a lot.
I think so too. And you mentioned what AI is not able to replicate from a comedic standpoint. One of my favorite reoccurring gags in this movie involves a couple supporting players. I want to look up and see who their names are so I don't mess this up. But one of the child prodigies, the character of Clifford, played by Aristal Meehan, and his father, played by Liev Schreiber. There's this reoccurring joke where he goes, "Do you dare me to do this?" And it inserts some type of dare, like, "Do you dare me to eat this hot red pepper?" Or "Do you dare me to climb this cactus?" And it's funny, but the way that some of those moments crystallize, like a frame or two later, like he eats that pepper, and all of a sudden, like 2 frames later, you'll notice, like, and this is like literally 2 minutes later, he'll be running to the water fountain trying to drink water that, oh, he did eat the pepper. It's like, but that's something AI can't do. It doesn't have that long-term memory yet to be able to replicate a long-term joke like that. But that's another example of one that actually has purpose. It has meaning. It's about a character, a young character, trying to use something extreme like that to evoke their own meaning into something, their own way of standing out, and that is a sense of consistency between all these characters, which is why I think this is a great companion piece to The French Dispatch, as you're alluding to there. I think they both deal with art in their own respective way, The French Dispatch being mostly about a reverence for what journalism used to be before the era of online journalism and clickbaity kind of things, And Asteroid City is sort of hearkening back to the art of cinematic and narrative art, right? And that's not all it is. There's a reason for that. There's more going on here with regards to grief that I'm sure you also want to talk about. But even The French Dispatch had a moment, or not even just a moment, it was about that thing as well, because the whole movie was surrounded by this looming ghost of Bill Murray, who was the head of this magazine. And it was about a tribute to the person that ran that business in the first place. In this case, it's sort of about the creator, the playwright, or the director, someone in that same kind of field, just overseeing a process and a tribute to that sense of vision. Yeah, which is what makes it so ironic that it's coming off the heels of those AI trailers we keep talking about.
Absolutely,
it's honestly a perfect response. It really is, and I just found that fascinating.
Absolutely, you gotta love the irony of that contrast, that the AI videos that go viral are mimicking classic Wes Anderson that we've seen everything pre The French Dispatch. Yet in these last few years, Wes has reverted against classic Wes and has become much more experimental. And that's partially what I loved about The French Dispatch. Yes, again, the composition, the framing, the color saturation, it is there in that film. But in terms of the structure of it and how Wes is, tapping into the medium of cinema and, in the case of that film, journalism, print, and the art that can come out of that. I love how he's able to bring a merriment to those two things. And even though it functions storytelling-wise as this anthology of sorts, there is a connective tissue, a deep connective tissue between each segment as it relates to the larger thread of The French Dispatch and how everything kind of trickles out of that. And then how everything somewhat comes back to the Bill Murray character in that film. And so I love the experimentation there, how distinctly different that is to everything else that he had done previously to that. And I just think it's all done very well. It's one of my favorite films of that year. And here he is continuing that same trajectory with the framing device of this film, as you mentioned earlier, this play within a movie or this play within, or that's in contrast of the production of it, the behind the scenes, if you will. Yeah. And then he's adding in these title cards that give us the scenes that we're about to watch, in each act. I love the consistency of that as well. There's the black and white cinematography that is in contrast to the yellow and blue saturated hues of the actual play. So visually, he is distinguishing between what is the play and what is the behind the scenes. And I just love how Anderson is toying with the cinematic language here between the film and the stage, and how the play within a movie informs what's really going on here as it relates to writing and intention and interpretation, because those things can become muddled. And in this context, I think Anderson is trying to use both mediums to say something about art and how it helps us see the world, especially when we don't always understand what's happening around us. And that is a big thing for these characters in this film, both internally, emotionally, but also externally. Again, the weirdness of this film.
And you can sense those parallels between the characters in the film of Asteroid City and the actor counterparts they're also playing in the production and creation of Asteroid City. And there is a literal parallel between them.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the experimental factor that's going on here, I think Wes is like, again, we're seeing him evolve right before our eyes. And we're in a completely new era that has moved away from, Moonrise Kingdom and the Grand Budapest Hotel. And I love those films or his animated movies. Like he is becoming something else entirely. And, the craft is always there, but even the craft of this film, I think, is something that I don't know if I'm smart enough to articulate here. I'll certainly do my best to, convey how it works for me. But, the way that he moves the camera here, like, I guess the best way to say it is that the way that Wes has always defined himself as, not that he's the cinematographer of his films, but the way the camera moves in his films, coupled with the editing.
Yeah.
All of that is here, but heightened to a completely different degree. I think of something like that opening shot where we first get to Asteroid City and the camera moves from left to right. So we get this simple pan. And of course, the framing of it is impeccable. It stops exactly when it needs to. Then we spin to the right where we get a completely different shot. Then we spin around to the backside. So now we've done a complete 180. And again, the framing is impeccable. And then eventually we make a full 360 just to establish setting, which is interesting when, again, you're comparing this to something like a stage play where you don't always get that 360 point of view, because when
you don't get that sense of movement all the time.
Absolutely. It's a one-dimensional view when you're sitting in the audience. Now, certainly the production design can add texture, but it's not that complete 360 that we get here. So I love the merriment of the craft and how that is informing this play within a play. Yeah. That's one example. We could certainly get into a lot of the other framing here.
Many examples,
such as the conversations that between characters that I certainly want to talk about.
Yeah.
But again, that's the experimental thing of Wes that I love, because Wes from 10 years ago, I don't know if he would have been able to pull this off in terms of how he heightens his camera work here, or the color palette, or the framing of everything that we see here to inform this, what he's trying to say artistically as it relates to the medium of the stage and cinema. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And I want to bounce off that a lot, because what Wes Anderson is doing with the camera, I still feel like is quite different for him in many ways. And many of our listeners might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I would have to go back to all of his films to see if this is a true statement I'm about to say, but I feel like the camera moves a lot more.
That's what I'm trying to say. Like he's done this before, but the way it moves, the editing, like everything seems heightened.
It's less static. And static's not a bad thing with regard to his films. Like he's very good at creating like a full-scale image that tends to hold true for a while. But here we get a lot of those pan shots like you're talking about, the way we're introduced to Asteroid City with those opening/closing credits I alluded to many times already. But I guess that's a dolly shot riding alongside the train entering Asteroid City.
Yeah,
again, listeners,
incredible.
correct me if I'm wrong on that. But yeah, the camera seems to move a lot more. And on top of that, too, we talk about Wes Anderson's dollhouse aesthetic, and this is certainly that's certainly the case here with Asteroid City. But his previous films, I think, sometimes got a little bit, again, this word is not a negative, but his films maybe got a little cluttered, like visually cluttered. There's a lot of stuff on the screen, right? You might see like a whole floor of a house, and you'll see stuff here and there, and it creates this like completely lived-in vibe, whereas this is mostly in the desert. There's a lot more space to work with. So that creates a neat juxtaposition than what we usually see from Wes Anderson, right?
And when you couple it with the set design of this film, which is immaculate, but I also love the lack of tangibility to it, in the sense that, like, you watch something like Moonrise Kingdom or even Grand Budapest, and especially everything Pretty Fantastic Mr. Fox, like those are settings that have that, as you're talking about, like this lived-in feel to them.
They still feel kind of three-dimensional.
Absolutely.
But this one kind of feels a little more two-dimensional.
Well, I was going to say, it feels stagey. It feels like we're watching a play. So that is
some of these buildings feel like cardboard cutouts or something. Like you just poke it and
There's
fall right over.
Paintings everywhere.
Yeah,
so it is meant to invoke that staginess that you would get when you go to the theater. So, that's what I love about, again, the experimentation that's going on. And perhaps that's why he does move the camera so much more than what he does. And not just from left to right, sometimes from up to down. And of course, the shot reverse shots that we get here, and how they involve the framing that they do. Because it's not just characters talk sometimes, but often it's not just characters talking to each other when we get those shot reverse shots. They're specifically framed in a way that is, I guess, for the lack of a better word, just very Wes Anderson. But all of it comes back to what this film is trying to be about as it relates to grief and sorrow, which we'll get into, but even more specifically, this play within a production and how art is driving that emotion.
Well, I think about the one consistently occurring conversation that occurs in the movie between Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson, between their two cabins or hotels they oversee each other, her bathroom and his photography studio, or his bedroom, whatever the heck it is. I feel like if AI Wes Anderson were to try and replicate that scene, it would be perfectly symmetrical. You'd see the window right in the middle and nothing else. But here, it's kind of crooked. It's kind of crooked.
It's a little
so
off
like
center,
the window is a little. It's actually like kind of disorienting. You're kind of like looking at it like this. Like I feel like I'm looking at it in the wrong way because like 1/3 of the image is the edge of that cabin. You could see the desert and distance out. It's like it's actually like in many ways kind of a poorly shot thing, but that's kind of what I love about it. Like it's so off center that it's actually kind of annoying. I love that because it feels like a direct commentary on what fake art can't do. And that's what I think in many ways what he's trying to get at here is that there might be a sense of fact that we can derive from those AI trailers we keep talking about, but it's still missing truth. And what art tends to capture is a sense of truth. And I think that's what he's trying to get at here overall.
Yeah. And again, this is me not being one of those film school nerds as much as I wish that I was. Because I did read this in a review. I'm trying to recall. I'd have to look it up. Perhaps I can do that after we're done here. But I did read that those off-center shots are invoking a certain artistic style or a certain artist that was famous for doing those things. So again,
maybe
coming back to the intentionality of Wes, it does seem as if that's what he was doing there. It wasn't just being off kilter for the sake of it. However, I think this is one of those things where two things can be true at once, where Wes might be invoking said artist that I can't think of his name here. But also I think it is a rebuttal to, again, intentionally or not, but a rebuttal to classic Wes, and that everything has to be perfectly symmetrical. Yeah. And here he's going, nope, here's something that is very off-center. Enjoy.
This pretty soon, like, you know what we might get sometime soon, unless he's already done this. Again, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we ever gotten a Wes Anderson Dutch angle?
I don't know, but it feels like that's the next movie.
We're getting there, and he's going to do that some point.
Yeah, but I love the way that he utilizes the camera here. Again, he's tapping into tricks that he's done before, but he's doing it way more often here in terms of, the zooms or the rolling shots. As we're talking about the shot reverse shots, but specifically framed. It's not just two characters talking to each other in a conventional sense, and especially the way the camera circles here. Yeah. And not just that opening shot, but you think of that when all these characters are in like some sort of cafeteria, like they're having lunch and the camera's just moving from table to table. Like it's just utterly fascinating. And and it's done in a way that we haven't seen from Wes. And then we get to what I think is arguably the most fascinating thing about this movie, and I think what distinguishes it from the rest of Wes Anderson's filmography. And again, it's funny if your response to this film is that you don't know what it's about. I think that's perfectly fair. I've seen that in a lot of reviews, and it's understandable because the film itself even invokes that idea at one point.
I think Wes doesn't really know what it's about. I think Wes even has his own questions. Like, okay, why did I choose to make a sci-fi element to this movie? Why is this take place in an asteroid-related backdrop? Like there are a lot of whys that are still here, but I think the answer is really why not?
And again, I think what's interesting is that it is certainly left up. Like this I feel like is left up to more interpretation than a lot of his other movies.
Sure.
However, and I say that to say, even if it is ambiguous, I don't think that it is thematically thin. There's plenty to ruminate on here as it relates to longing and connection, grief and closure, and even our place in the universe. And like all of Wes's movies, there's as much levity in all of that as there is poignancy. But there is one huge distinction here. When you think of Wes Anderson, the first thing that comes to mind are probably his dazzling visuals and how unique it is. or you think of his writing, of which he's been nominated at least 3 times for Oscars for writing specifically, maybe more, but I think 3. And while his writing in Asteroid City is exquisite, I'd argue that more than any other Wes Anderson film, it's more performance driven. This film is more performance driven. The ideas he's examining here are alluring, but it's the performances that make them ravishing, especially because often they're reliant on visual cues and internalized reflections to make them as potent as they are. It's Augie telling his kids about their mom. Or
I was just going to say, that one, sorry to cut you off, but that one moment with Jason Schwartzman as Augie telling his family and his kids about their mom, that's the moment I knew this is a different Wes Anderson movie, tonally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a great scene. It's a great performance from Schwartzman in that moment.
I agree. Or, as you noted, his somber exchanges with Midge in the window, or Clifford, going back to that character, revealing why he's incessantly asking people to dare him, or June and how she reacts to her class, or even to Montana as well. Yeah. There's Woodrow and how he reverberates primarily through subtlety. There's also a moment Augie has with Conrad Earp, the Edward Norton character, that's oddly very touching, especially with how it crystallizes. And then
there's
later
a moment
on,
a moment in a tent with Tilda Swinton's character, where she reveals some childhood, I don't want to say abandonment issues, but just childhood dreams that she never got to fulfill that she wanted to instill in some younger mind. And it's like there's a lostness in all these characters.
Absolutely. That moment she has with Woodrow where she reverberates like some pride, like she's proud of him, but also it's that childlike wonder. And as you noted, like there's something missing that she is kind of pushing onto him. And going back to Augie, though, he has that moment with Conrad Earp, but later on, he has this exchange with the Sherbert character played by Adrian Brody, which to me is one of the most striking moments of the film. And then, of course, as we somewhat alluded to at the beginning of all this, Augie's moment with the actress, that's all she's labeled as here, played by Margot Robbie.
Love that she does not have a name.
Which is so tender and heartfelt. Like, you think about all of those moments I just mentioned, and the ones that you did as well. And yes, the writing there by Wes is admirable. There's nothing wrong with it. It is good. But it is the performances that make them as tender and as heartfelt and as striking as they are. This is more performance driven than any other Wes film, I think. And again, I like what he's tapping into as it relates to longing and connection that is arresting. I don't want to undermine the writing necessarily, but there is a case to be made that this is the most performance-driven movie. And I think all the cast here, and it's funny because sometimes people make fun of how extensive the cast is in these movies, and maybe it's distracting to some degree, but the somber tone that he brings to this, in addition to this broad idea that everyone can relate with in some degree or another, as far as our place in the universe, longing and connection, and what that means to us on an individual level, that comes through here in the writing, but primarily in the performances because of how distinctive every one of these characters are. They all come from different backgrounds, and yet when the film spends time on those things, it is the performances that bring out the nuances and the emotion in it all.
And I think that's necessary for a film like this, because even by the end, I knew that the film was about things like longing and grief and sorrow and seeking some sense of meaning or justification in your own world and life. But I didn't really know the what of all of that, like what drove each character individually. All I knew is that I felt that that's what the movie was about. Yeah. And that's kind of interesting. You know, like I can't say that all too often about Wes Anderson's work, that the what is so vague, but the how and the sense of feeling it gives off is so there. Like it prioritizes itself in that way, which is why, yes, we don't want to undermine the writing here, but to be honest, the script is so like secondary or even below that with regard to priority here.
Which is
in fact
weird for a Wes movie, right?
It is, but it's something I mentioned earlier. There's less dialogue in this movie. This is a less written movie by Wes Anderson.
Yes.
And when there is dialogue, it is a performance that's trying to drive some type of emotional truth out of it. And that really is what the movie, I feel like, is about, is how art is fueled by emotional truth and what you bring from your own life into this, which is why that last scene, or one of those final scenes between Schwartzman and Margot Robbie, is so crucial, is that it's mostly tapping into that very idea. I think it's really ironic, though, that it's mentioned that Margot Robbie's scene from this play, Asteroid City, was ultimately cut. So they're reenacting this emotional moment of truth. Is that Wes's way of almost critiquing modern narrative art that doesn't go for emotional truth because they cut those things out? I don't know. I mean, certainly those AI trailers do that. but I feel like there might be a bit of a meta component there as well. But yeah, like that scene's very tender. I mean, if anything, if I had to knock it for just one slight thing, maybe it's slightly distracting seeing someone like Margot Robbie in such a brief moment, and that's mostly just due to how recognizable she is right now.
She's a big
and
star.
She's not a Wes regular, right? So maybe if it was a Wes regular, it might be a bit of a different story. But I still think she's very good in the movie, and maybe it needs to be a bit more, I guess, performative and louder in that regard to make that point known.
Well, I think maybe Margot Robbie being this big star adds to the meta component of
perhaps
it, or that commentary.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, there's an irony there. Okay.
I mean, because when you have someone of her caliber delivering what is essentially a monologue, but she's articulating what both characters are saying.
Yeah.
However, keeping us aware of Jason Schwartzman, of Augie in the moment as well. He keeps cutting back and forth.
Yeah.
Which, again, in terms of the shot reverse shots, and again, the specific framing of it, because it's not, the camera isn't directly on their face the entire time. So it's interesting how the whole thing is edited and how it's framed. But she is essentially delivering both parts, and she's so good in the moment. And because she's a big star, it certainly adds to that question of, why was this cut again? Like, this is such a tender, heartwarming moment that speaks to the universal truths that this film is trying to get at. And yet the behind the scenes production is, no, we don't have time for that. And yeah, this film is certainly getting into the whole, in terms of, in this case, a play, but even cinematically, like, why are we removing these heartfelt truths? But I do love that at the heart of this film, Wes leaves so much of that in, and the stuff that would be quote unquote cut. And I think what would be even more hilarious is if Wes was told by a producer that scene has to be cut out of the movie, and then he left it in that way. I don't know if that's true, but I want that to be true.
I wouldn't be surprised if it then went over that producer's head, thinking like, "Oh, good, you cut it. Thanks for doing that. Oh, this new scene, okay. I mean, that's fine. We got Margot Robbie there. It's all good." It's like, wow, if that is true, oh my God, this might have just become the greatest movie ever made.
Oh my God, it is certainly masterful in that regard. And I think what's also interesting, another irony, because you're talking about, and I completely agree, that this is one of the least amount of writing Wes has had to do for a movie.
Yeah.
But this is a stage play, essentially, right? Yeah. And this is theater. And when you go to the theater, you don't expect that there's not going to be less writing. And that's not to say that stage plays can't be performance driven, but there's certainly a lot of dialogue and a lot of banter when you go to the theater. And this isn't one of those stage plays. Now, I don't know how this would function in a theater, especially if you're all the way in the back and up at the top where, you have to let the actors act internally. I don't know if you can see that necessarily, so I don't know how it would function in an actual theater. But that's what I love about the experimenting going on here, because when cinematically speaking, these characters have their moments, and Wes is not afraid to just let the camera linger and to let these performances carry the weight of what's happening. And again, that's not new to Wes, but it's on a different stratosphere in this film. Like this is way more performance driven than most of his other films.
Even with the more inconsequential characters here, such as Steve Carell as this hotel manager, this cabin manager, or something like that. It's a character without an arc, really, right? But the way this character communicates, the way he constantly says, like, "Yes, sir, I understand," then he gives an explanation. Did you get some sense of loneliness from this guy?
I
did
point.
too.
Yeah,
I think that's the okay.
And that's not in the writing.
I wanted to make sure I wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy, but
Yeah.
I did sense something like that, even in a character that's as inconsequential to the narrative as he was.
Absolutely. I sensed that, and I found that to be purposeful. Maybe that was a happy accident. I don't know. But we learn nothing about him in the writing, other than that he's the manager of this hotel. That's it. That's all that we know. Yep. And there's a couple of comedic gags with him when he's talking about these machines out back that sells even something like real estate, which is hilarious.
That's kind of neat. Yeah.
So,
a real estate vending machine.
That's so good. And so there's some good comedy that comes out of that, as dry and subtle as it is. But Steve Carell is good enough as a comedian that he can certainly make that work. But we don't really know much about him as a character other than that sense of loneliness we get in his performance, because this is anything but a loud Steve Carell performance. It's very subtle, it's internalized, and I do like that. I think you could even say, this is maybe a little bit of a stretch, and I'm willing to admit that. But I look at something like the Jeffrey Wright character who's like some sort of like military personnel.
The General, what's his name? General Gibson, I think he plays. Yeah.
And his character is used much more comedically than anything else here. But he has a monologue that kind of, jokingly kind of mirrors some of the same truthful troubles that these other characters are going through, just in a different tonal way. And also he's in charge of this scenario, but it also feels like he has no support around him, from this fictional president that we don't see, or just from anything that relates to governmental or military systems. And this is such a small part of the movie, but I'm using it as an example to say that I think you can argue that there's a sense of loneliness in this character because he's in charge of all this, and he's given no answers from the people there or from these fictional leaders that he says he has to talk to, but he never gets any answers from. Like he's always running around like a chicken with his head cut off, kind of thing.
I do think those scenes are very funny and rightfully done. I just got to say one more thing with regard to these actors and performances. I would say this is not a spoiler because the opening/closing credits reveal that Jeff Goldblum is in this movie in a glorified cameo. He plays the alien. That's who he's credited as, okay? And at one point we do see him, but we also see the alien first. And when we see that alien, maybe it's because I saw the name Jeff Goldblum in those credits, but when we see this, this like animated two-dimensional thing that pops up, I'm looking there, I think, why does that look like Jeff Goldblum? Why does that remind me of him? And maybe it's because I knew, but I just something about it, just like the way the eyes move, just looks so Goldblum-like. I don't know how that was able to be captured in that way, which is. JD. The more we talk about this, I like this movie a lot more.
It's good,
Wes Anderson.
Yeah, and the first time that the alien is introduced, I love how unexpected it somewhat is, because I went into this film not knowing too much about it, right? Yeah. So when Wes gets into like those weird territories, I was a little taken aback, but utterly fascinated by what's going on. Yeah. And it's also funny too, because I went to see this with a couple of friends, and one of them, I've had talks with her in the past about stop motion, because for whatever reason she's not a fan of stop motion animation.
Interesting.
We've had fights about that, but God love her. At any rate, I told her this is a live action. This is not Fantastic Mr. Fox or I Love Dogs. Don't worry. And then that moment comes, and the only thing I can think of, well, I lied, because there's at least a little. Yeah, there's a little bit.
Did she say anything about that?
We joked about it afterwards. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But on the whole, she actually really liked the film, which was a nice surprise.
Okay, well that's a win. That's a win.
Definitely
for sure.
a win. But that is to say, like I do love how Wes just is, how he brings everything that he knows as a filmmaker into this movie, and is playing with it in these fascinating ways. And I do love the comedy of what the alien brings here, but the sense of longing in these characters, and because when you're feeling grief and loss and longing and connection, the thing that will amplify those things all the more is when you experience something like that, and you're immediately thinking of your place in the universe.
Sure.
And maybe how small you feel, and then you're feeling grief and loss on top of that. It just compounds on itself, which is why I think the narrative turns here are not random. I think that I agree. Really compelling stuff. And then you throw on the performances on top of all of that, which is really great. Sometimes very funny, such as, there's certainly some comedic flavor the first time the alien comes, but the second time around, and then how it just turns into chaos is Wes at his best comedically. Like, that's some really
nice rhyme there.
stuff.
Wes at his best.
Wes at his best.
There's the bumper sticker
hilarious.
for this movie.
Or even like if we want to go back to the performances and how they convey a sense of loneliness, a sense of longing. Like I think that's what I love about Edward Norton and Adrian Brody's characters here, as they are certainly involved. Like their scenes are about the production of Asteroid City, of this play. And yet what they bring to this movie more than anything isn't necessarily, some of it is art and how we are inspired and what drives us to make good art. That's a part of it. But you do sense that these characters are longing for something, which is what makes, that moment between Edward Norton and Jason Schwartzman early on really fascinating, with how that crystallizes with a moment of togetherness, I'll say vaguely.
Yeah, for sure.
Or Brody's monologue, not really a monologue, but his conversation he has with Augie, and what he says as it relates to the ambiguity of what this is about. It doesn't matter what it's about. Just make us feel something, which Schwartzman was certainly doing
more
in
important.
his performance.
That's more important sometimes.
And that's I love that about this film, and how the performances bring out, regardless of what your interpretation is, and regardless of what Wes's intention is. I think those things are muddled very purposefully here. And, because at the end of it, regardless of what your takeaway is thematically, as long as you feel something, I think that's what Wes wants more than anything else.
Sometimes the best movies are not about telling you what happens. It's about trying to derive some type of meaning by how what happens makes you feel. I mean, this is certainly not in the same camp as something like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? But I have no idea what still happens in 2001. Like the what, and then I have no idea what happens at the end of that movie. I mean, I love it for that reason, but I have no idea what's going on. But I can derive some type of truth that I think the film is getting at from it. I can derive a moral. I can take something away thematically speaking.
Yeah.
I can do that here with Asteroid City. I don't know what necessarily happens, but sometimes we get too focused on the what. Or I say like that is the royal we, not you and I specifically. We have a different mindset that we look for different things, but a lot of general audiences sometimes need a sense of, or they need an explanation to things, right? And here's a movie that says that's kind of bullcrap. Does it make you feel something? Can you take some type of lesson from what you're seeing regardless? And that's the more interesting aspect for me.
I completely agree. And in all of that, I don't think it should be lost that Wes is willing to have some fun along the way.
It's still a funny movie.
Because
it's less funny comparatively, but that's purposeful. But it still has trademark Wes humor.
Exactly. And there are two visual gags that I wanted to bring up here that I loved throughout this film. One is this car chase that happens like 3 or 4 times just totally randomly.
Oh yeah.
With
guns a-blazing.
There's two cops.
It's actually very violent.
Yeah, but like that is never brought up or explained. Characters don't mention it. It just happens. And again, where it's less writing and it's simply about characters reacting because we see the visual gag of it. And then Wes just simply, lets the camera linger on these characters as they contemplate what the hell they just saw.
For sure.
It's so
for
good.
sure.
And then the other one is the Road Runner, the Road Runner, excuse me. Which is, is that stop motion? I'm not sure what
that was. I mean, it was very convincing stop motion because at first I thought, is that a real bird?
It doesn't seem like, it's some sort of animation, I think.
It herks and jerks in a way that there's
Or
definitely
puppet,
some
maybe?
type of, I think it's puppetry.
It might
I
be
think there's
puppetry.
happening.
Yeah. But hilarious. I just love how this
very funny.
Roadrunner appears again 3 or 4 times. And we see characters interact, and it's just this thing that lingers. So
I feel like there's a hidden game here because one of the times we see it is so off in the distance that it makes me think, are there sequences in the movie where it's just hidden in the background? Is this like, has it become this movie's Easter egg?
Yeah, it might be. It might be a little bit of a Where's Waldo situation with the
yeah. Wow. Oh, man. Now the movie has instant replay value.
Exactly. All right. Do you have any final thoughts here on Asteroid City?
I mean, it's a Wes Anderson movie. We got to at least mention names like Robert Yemen, cinematographer.
Yeah.
Alexander Desplat, composer. Great work here once again. I will say I think Desplat's work here is maybe less memorable.
It's more muted as well. That's something I
yeah.
took note of in the theater. There's not a lot of score here comparatively
You're right.
to a lot of other Wes movies.
Yeah, but again, I think that suits the movie well. So when I say his score is less memorable, that's not really a complaint on his music here. It's a different approach that this movie requires. This specific type of movie requires, and I think he serves that purpose very well. So.
I agree.
Typical collaborators of Wes Anderson's doing great work once again. But yeah, looking at my ranking once again of Wes Anderson. So we sort of talked about this on episode 539. You, Ryan, and Jay were you were the Royals of the group, and I was the Fox. And I still stand by Fantastic Mr. Fox being my favorite, with Grand Budapest Hotel, Royal Tenenbaums rounding out my top 3. But it gets complicated when you get to like that number 4 to number 8 spot for me. I feel like depending on rewatches, they'll all shift. Isle of Dogs is high there for me. And right now I do have Life Aquatic rounding out the top 5. But a lot of that is because that ending for that movie just really works for me. Like, that's a movie that is saved by the ending. If it weren't for that ending, I think Life Aquatic could be in last place, honestly. Which is my way of saying I think Asteroid City is a better movie than Life Aquatic. It's just Life Aquatic really sticks the landing in a way that I think no other Wes Anderson film has. Not to say it's better or worse, just different. It hits differently emotionally. But I could see Asteroid City rising the ranks in time. This is the one that I think has perhaps the most replay value of some of his more recent offerings because it's just so ambiguous. But I like that. I like that. So I can't wait to see this one again. I could see it growing for me as time goes on. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I loved it. I haven't done that exercise as I noted in my opening thoughts. However,
I doubt it's going to top Royal Tenenbaums for you, though.
No, it won't top Royal. I can say this convincingly at this moment without having done that exercise. I do like it better than anything in that bottom tier. Anything in that 6 through 10, if we're just looking at the other 10 movies right now, it's higher than those for me. Without question.
I like it more than Darjeeling Limited. Again, and no knock on these other films.
Yeah, I like them all. I like them all.
Yeah. I think it's certainly better than Bottle Rocket for me. I do like it more than French Dispatch, even if it does work as a good companion piece. I think it's more consistent than that film was, but maybe purposefully. I mean, there was a sense of inconsistency with the French Dispatch that felt necessary. It's just not every segment really worked for me. But I do like it more than that. I like it more than Rushmore. I think it's better than that movie, which is admittedly Rushmore's a film I admire. I think it's a cold and despondent film that doesn't always sit well with me, given its subject matter. So it's one I don't always go back to. So I certainly like the ambition of this one a little bit more.
Yeah, I really love this film as well. And looking at, again, off the cuff here, I might have this at. I probably will put it somewhere at 4 or 5
Gotcha.
initially,
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah.
Because it's Royal, Fantastic, Grand Budapest. Those 3, I think, are set.
How about that? We have the same
place.
top 3. Get out of my brain, man. Come on.
And where we will differ is I love Moonrise Kingdom. That's at my number 4 pretty comfortably. But
Okay.
in time, this might jump that spot and be at that number 4. Because currently I have Moonrise at 4 and French Dispatch at 5. This will likely land in that 4 or 5 spot, at least right now. But the more I sit on this, the more I watch it and think about it, it certainly could jump the ranks all the more. But
where do you have Isle of Dogs right now?
7.
Okay, so it almost sounds like the way you feel about Moonrise Kingdom comparatively to me is kind of how I am with Isle of Dogs, because I think I like that one quite a bit more than you actually.
I do love Isle of Dogs. It's some of the issues I have a few issues with that film, but it doesn't. Like I'll say this: when it comes to Isle of Dogs, I do really like it a lot. I think it just, for me, it's the films above it and how they resonate than it is anything against Isle of Dogs, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I think that's a fair statement.
So
But yeah, looking at his filmography, these 11 feature films rather, it's interesting. Yeah, because I told you many times before, man, it was not the biggest Wes Anderson film, becoming a InSession film critic. Back in the day, 2014, I don't like Wes, not my style.
Yeah.
Now I don't think there's a film of his I hate.
I know. It is quite
even Moonrise
fascinating.
Kingdom. Moonrise Kingdom and Bottle Rocket are the 2 that I'm kind of like wavering thumbs up, kind of middle of the road for me. But even those, there are aspects I really appreciate about those movies.
Yeah, I mean, I have Darjeeling Limited last, but they're still overall, I still like that film. Like I'd still give
I
that
do too.
A 3.5 on Letterboxd. Like, I really like it. Bottle Rocket for a debut film, I think is quite good. Life Aquatic, I really like. I agree with you, especially with how it sticks to landing. It's one of his most hilarious films to me. Like, I love the humor of Life Aquatic. So when it comes to that 6 through 10, like I love Rushmore, love Isle of Dogs. It's just more so how those top 5, now 6. So, I just find those on a different level.
Yeah,
and,
I agree.
And they're some of the best movies of the years in which they come out. And in the case of Royal, I think it's just simply one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah,
so
that'll be fun to talk about it further when we get to our 2001 retrospect. But we're still going to do that, right?
Yeah,
we have to keep doing those.
We'll do that, for sure. It might be pushed a little later than what we typically do in the calendar year, but
yeah, I still have a lot of homework to do.
Yeah, because I still have a bunch of homework to do. But I definitely want to do that. At any rate, circling back to Asteroid City, just a few final thoughts. I definitely want to echo you on the score and how it's utilized. I think that's very good. The set design we briefly talked about earlier, but want to reverberate that I love its staginess. Like, I love its matte paintings. I love its cardboard cutouts. I love its, how the puppetry, if we're looking at the Roadrunner or the stop motion of the alien. Like, I love the set design and how it's utilized here. I also love, because again, it's invoking a stage play, how we're in Asteroid City, and there's like this highway ramp that is just never finished. Like, it's just half a ramp.
And they never explain it. They never explain it. It's like but it's like I'm trying to look at the geography of it. Like, where's it supposed to be going?
That just makes no sense. But it's like one of those things where it like if you're gonna be on a stage, you can't have a whole highway, right, or a whole ramp.
Right.
So like that's
exactly.
It's one of those things that's like, this fits the stage, so let's just go with it.
Fair.
I love that. And also just want to circle back to what we were saying earlier, like the conversations between the Midge character and Augie, because we spend quite a few scenes there between them.
Yeah.
And it's when the film is certainly at its most somber, at least in some places. And I love the dynamic of that whole setup. We talked about it visually, how off center it is, but again, the performances there and how they both equally invoke this idea of loss and trying to find themselves, and how they are brought together through their grieving is something that I find really fascinating.
For sure.
And also, again, the merriment of art, you know, because it's a little meta in the sense that Scarlett Johansson is an actress playing an actress. And she is, you know, through these interactions she has in the window, she's like practicing these scenes that she has for a movie that's coming up. Right. And how she taps into this faux performance, but also feels real at the same time. Like that's a tricky balancing act. Like you can tell, like she brings a little bit to it that where you can feel that she's acting within a performance, but also bringing truth to that acting within a performance. It's really great, and how that taps into the Augie character, I think, is equally compelling as well. And sometimes not just for like these broad universal truths, but comedically as well. Like there's like one of the my favorite moments of the film was when she's like, "Hey, look, I have this scene. It's this nude scene." And where you act it out with me, and the camera lingers on him for a moment. He doesn't say anything, and then after a moment, because she's like, "Is that okay?" Or he's like, "Oh, I meant to say yes. I said yes.
I said it. I said it in my head."
Like, it's just so good. Like I love that. And, because who in that situation, like we would all probably all have that reaction. Like I like, said yes immediately in my mind. I thought I said it out loud, but I guess I didn't.
God. Yeah.
Like I love that.
The most relatable male character in movie history now. Or to say most relatable straight male character in movie history.
Yeah. Straight right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like again, it's how Wes is playing with the form. And the experimentation that's going on here, I just absolutely love. So like this new phase of Wes, give it to me all day. I absolutely adore this movie. With that, we will have a full written review. Actually, I believe we do. We have a full written review of this up at InSessionFilm.com. So you can go and check that out. Of course, you can follow us at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. We'll have some more thoughts over there. And you can let us know if you agree or disagree with anything that we had to say here regarding Asteroid City. Follow us on social media. You can hit us up there if you want to reach out to us about our conversation here, or email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right, Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
The InSession Film Band is happening, JD. It's happening. 3 Royals and a Fox. It's happening.
I like it. Yep.
Yeah. For any listeners out there who didn't catch that reference during episode 539 when we all named our favorite Wes Anderson movies, I was the lone wolf / lone fox.
The lone fox.
That had Fantastic Mr. Fox as my favorite, while you three all had Royal Tenenbaums. So it's a great band name, 3 Royals and the Lone Fox. Look out for our first album. We're going to record it at the Grand Budapest Hotel. We just got to find time to get there.
Of course.
Yeah. I just thought that was cute.
Yeah,
that was funny.
And of course, the title of that album will be "The Debut is Fine, but we're looking forward to what's next." So
that's a great album name. It really is.
So good. It's perfect.
It's almost meta. That's usually how most bands start off. It's like our debut. This is us getting to know each other, getting a feel for our sensibilities, the lay of the musical land. The debut will probably be fine, but look out for what we do next.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Love that. But yeah, go check out episode 539. We talked a lot about Wes Anderson. We also had a big announcement on that show that you can go and check out. And then I think on episode 540, Brendan and I are going to talk about the current state of cinema and maybe how bleak it is, given some recent news.
Oh, man. Given Asteroid City, we should probably have Wes Anderson on this show.
Maybe we should. If his PR reps are listening, we would love to have Wes on the show. Please reach out.
Gosh.
InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Hit us up. At any rate, thanks for listening, watching, everybody. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please be sure to rate and review us there. Subscribe as well. And stay tuned for episode 540. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have some more reviews coming up soon. And we will see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man, I love Wes. Oh, he's just the best.
He's a good boy. He's a good boy.
Now is the time for America to chart its course to a green energy future. And we can't do it without clean hydrogen. But it's up to regulators in Washington to establish the right rules that advance clean hydrogen today. Clean hydrogen needs the full extent of the production tax credit to decarbonize heavy industry, create high-skilled jobs, and lead the global energy transition. Get the facts at cleanhydrogentoday.org. Paid for by the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association.